They taught you to believe that pressure comes from the outside, from deadlines, expectations, responsibilities, and circumstances. But the most effective pressure is the kind you apply to yourself without ever questioning where it came from. You wake up already tense, already measuring your worth against invisible standards you never consciously agreed to. And this quiet pressure follows you through the day, shaping your pace, your choices, and even your sense of identity. You call it ambition. You call it discipline. You call it drive. But beneath those labels is something far more subtle: internalized control. The system no longer needs to watch you, correct you, or push you, because you have learned to monitor yourself, judge your rest, and feel guilt whenever you slow down. You push yourself harder than anyone ever asked you to. You criticize yourself more harshly than any authority ever could. You feel anxious even when nothing is happening. And because this pressure feels self-generated, you assume it must be necessary. Necessary for success. Necessary for survival. Necessary for a future that always seems just out of reach. So you stay tense, productive, responsive, constantly optimizing yourself as if rest were a weakness and stillness were a threat. A calm mind begins to question priorities. A rested mind notices absurdity. A quiet mind becomes difficult to control. So, calm is framed as laziness. Rest is framed as irresponsibility. Presence is framed as unproductive. Over time, you stop listening to your body. You override fatigue. You ignore intuition. You suppress discomfort, not because you are forced to, but because you believe you should. This is how pressure becomes identity. You are no longer someone under pressure. You are someone who applies pressure. And once pressure is internalized, the system disappears. You blame yourself for burnout. You shame yourself for exhaustion. You treat rest as something that must be earned, instead of asking why life feels like a race with no finish line. The most effective systems do not demand constant work. They create constant urgency. Urgency keeps you moving without reflection. Urgency keeps you compliant without commands. Urgency keeps you focused on short-term relief instead of long-term meaning. You are always catching up, but never arriving. And because everyone around you feels the same pressure, it appears normal, shared, unquestionable. Normal is the most convincing disguise control can wear. You measure your value in output. You track your progress in numbers. You compare your pace to others. And slowly, your inner life is reduced to metrics. But pressure does not create fulfillment. It creates motion without direction. It keeps you busy enough to avoid asking whether the path you are on actually belongs to you. This is why silence feels uncomfortable. Why unstructured time creates anxiety. Why rest triggers guilt instead of relief. Because in silence, the pressure has nowhere to hide. And in that quiet, an unsettling question begins to surface. What if you stopped pushing? What if you slowed down without justification? What if your worth did not need constant proof? Those questions are dangerous to systems that rely on self, because the moment you stop pressuring yourself, you create space. And space creates clarity. Clarity reveals that much of what feels urgent is artificial, much of what feels necessary is inherited, and much of what feels personal was never truly yours. This is not an argument against effort or growth. It is an invitation to examine who benefits from your constant tension. Because effort chosen freely feels different from effort driven by fear. One builds, the other consumes. Once you recognize that difference, you can no longer confuse pressure with purpose. This is Mindrax Theory, and pressure was never proof of meaning.